It's the Hoffman Show, final hour, final 45 minutes today. Capitals hockey coming up. Pre-game starts at 6:45 here on the Team 980. We got that tonight and tomorrow. It is our pleasure now, though, to head back out to the phones. Welcome in our guy, Neil Dalal from the Hoop District on a very busy day. I guess locker clean-out day. It's a lot more organized in the NBA. They have guys actually come to the podium as opposed to us standing around like what I used to do when I was on the beat covering the Commanders. But, Neil, a very interesting day full of comments. First of all, welcome back to the show, man. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am curious, before I get into some of the stuff that stuck out to me, as you're walking out of the facility, you're walking out of ESA today, and you've heard everybody talk. You've heard Tommy, you've heard Wes, you've heard Brad, you've heard all the other players that you talked to. What's the one thing that was kind of lingering in your mind as being top of mind?
Yeah, everybody is, saying that, yes, this season was a disappointment. Obviously, the front office has a directive to, hey, we need to continue to be competitive. We are not pushing the reset button on anything. We still want to continue to, move forward with this core of Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma. Obviously, the latter of the two have decisions to make this summer. But, obviously, and, I'm sure you're going to get into it, the tone that Bradley Beal had, during his exit interview, he's not necessarily, saying, hey, he kind of took it as I'm not going to be visibly frustrated up here. I am frustrated with how things went. And so it was kind of hard to read the room for him of, well, does that mean you're thinking about making a move? And then it ended on terms where he said, no, if I wanted to be gone, you guys would know it. And so obviously, some of the headlines that are out there right now, people are going to run with. But, to me, I think it's more or less status quo of what we expected these last, few weeks of the season once things, finalized that, yes, they were not going to make the postseason.
So let's go in on Brad's comments and kind of flush them out a little bit, and then I want to get to some of the stuff that Sheppard said. But for Brad, when he says he's frustrated, did he expound on what he meant by that? Is he frustrated because he feels like the organization failed him? Is he frustrated at himself? Is he just mad in general with no general direction? What kind of insight did he give on where that frustration is coming from and where it's being channeled to and what he wants to see change?
Yeah, and to your point, he didn't really expound too much on what is the root of his frustration. How is that frustration any different or similar to, years past? Obviously, he's been with this organization for more than a decade. Everybody is, pointing, and, rightfully so. Granted, no one wants to use that as an excuse, but, the availability of the key core players is probably the number one, source of frustration. They played 35 games together, Beal, Kuzma, and Porzingis, and, it is going to take a little bit more time than that. I think there's frustration also just of, he did sign his big Supermax contract. He wanted to come into this season with a chip on his shoulder, prove people wrong, prove people that, hey, I am somebody that is worthy and deserving of a Supermax contract. But, for a multitude of reasons, things just did not work out after the All-Star break. And, that's probably the biggest frustration right there, because going into the All-Star break, they were looking like, okay, hey, we can be competitive here. We're 17-10 in our last 27 games going into the All-Star break. That's a third of the season. That actually, ends up being a 50-win team on pace. But I think just anything that could go wrong to trip them up did, and then that's just the snowball effect of frustration adds up.
Neil Dalal, Hoop District, with us here on the Team 980. So speaking of chunks of the season and pace, right? They were on that pace for a 50-plus win type of season in that middle stretch where they had a lot better play and a lot better health. Fine. But they played 35 games with those big three. They were 16-19. You extrapolate that out over an 82-game season, it's a 37-win team. Which do you think, how much credence do you give the good stretch versus the bad stretch? And because I look at the data, Neil, and I don't think that this core can win basketball games. I think they're all individual pieces that could be a part of a winning team, but the collective doesn't add up for a variety of reasons. You watch every single game. You're there for most of them. You talk to these guys, and I respect the way you think about the game a lot. Which team do you feel like they are more, the 17-10 stretch Or are they, a 40-ish win team if everybody's healthy, and thus they should probably think about doing something else?
Right. I think, you hit the nail on the head there. If everybody is healthy, which I think we know at this point, if you're a Wizards fan, that's not something that you can continually bank on because, more times than not, and for the Wizards case, often more times than not, that's not going to be the case. And so, Tommy Sheppard tried to, in his, swaying of the narrative that he's, pretty good at because, he grew up in PR. He's trying to say that, in those 35 games, we had kind of tougher competition than, say, the average competition you would see over a full 82-game season. I probably need to, go in and dig into more of that of whether there's actual, legitimacy to such a comment. But, to your point, 16 and 19, that's not anything, profound. I think you might have also, tweeted out there, per 100 net rating, on off, it's +3, +1, for a couple of the duos in there. And, that's not really moving the needle too much. And so even if everybody is healthy and, unless people are making leaps and bounds improvements, which, people can get better. Porzingis says he wants to get better. Kuzma says he wants to get better. I'm sure they will be putting in the work in the offseason. But at the end of the day, I don't know if you can say that, this team is going to be competing for, home court playoff advantage in the first round. Are they going to, be contenders to make an Eastern Conference Finals appearance that they have not done in 44 years? The eye test is, like you said, bunch of really good individual players on paper, but for whatever reason, and, Bradley Beal has almost been the common denominator most of the time, is that, you put all the pieces together, the synergy is such that you're not better than the individual pieces. It seems like you're always a step below. And so, to your point, and many fans have been crying for this, the reset button has to be pushed at a certain point because otherwise you're just going to be middling, in this draft purgatory stage that they have for several years.
Neil Dalal, Hoop District, with us here on the Team 980. Do you think they can win? So Beal has his most efficient season ever, and they love to talk about that, and I get why. It's impressive what Brad did this year in a lot of ways, but it didn't contribute to a lot of winning. Can they win with this version of Beal with the ball in his hands as much as it was, or does there need to be kind of a reversion to him being more of an off-ball player and trying to find a different ball handler? And, Monte also had a pretty good year statistically, but, is that the right fit, I guess is kind of what I'm asking. Is that part of what a potential solution could look like, knowing that Beal does not want to go anywhere and that fans, as much as they might want a trade involving him, it's like figuring out how to maximize with Brad is actually the strategy that lives in reality. Yeah, no,
I think, again, exactly right. I think Bradley Beal is at his best when he is playing off ball and only has to worry about shooting. It's great and amazing that he has been able to, be a facilitator, be a, more of a combo guard and point guard at times handling the ball. That's all fine and well, but that's not, who he is. He is a deadly scorer in today's NBA at all three levels. Tommy Sheppard, alluded to it a little bit. They want him to go back to being, that guy who averaged in back-to-back seasons 30 points a game. Obviously Russell Westbrook was, really great for his production, in the COVID pandemic season. Even when, Ish Smith was here, granted, Brad was getting up a lot more shots, but, somebody who can just distribute the ball to him. He's not having to be the guy that runs the offense and also scores in the offense. That is where Brad, has always been at his best. Going back to, the John Wall era, John would set him up great. And so Brad really thrived off of that. Whether, Monte Morris can be that point guard to, ensure that, okay, Brad can go back to being the deadly scorer, that he showed that he was, that got him, all NBA and got him a Supermax. That will yet to be seen. But, certainly I agree with you that he needs to go back to, being one of those, top 2, top 3 shooting guards in the conference to hopefully take this team to another level.
Two questions for Neil Dalal before we end our chat here on the day after the Wizards season mercifully comes to an end. First is just a simple, how do you feel like Wes did? I've had a hard time evaluating him because of all of the moving pieces, but how do you feel like Wes Unseld Jr. is as a head coach now with 2 years under his belt?
Yeah, and, I would certainly not want to, pound the guy or anything. I think people have to learn that 2 years in being an NBA head coach, it's very different. I think Kyle Kuzma summed it up well. He's slowly learning to be less of an assistant coach and more of the lead guy. He's slowly starting to get into the little nuances that you have to teach young players, whether it's, screening angles or, the spacing on the floor. He's, slowly making progress there. I think obviously given the expectations within the organization, that's not necessarily always lining up with the development Wes simply just has to do as a coach. I think he'll come back a lot better because of how meticulous and diligent he is, that I'm sure he's going to, dissect every little thing, during this upcoming off season. So, still working his way there. The defense is certainly not nearly where anybody would like it to be. That was supposed to be, one of his calling cards coming in, and it just really hasn't translated so far. They're still a below average defense. But I think, there is still hope. A lot of fans are quick to rush to judgment, and, that's what being a fan is most of the time. But he's going to be back. He has another year guaranteed on his deal. Most likely the fourth year is probably a team option. So, there's going to be a lot of make it or break it, in this upcoming season. But there's certainly much more room for growth for Wes, and, I think he's going to be up to the challenge.
Yeah, I do too. I will admit I'm a little biased towards Wes because I just really like him as a dude, and I feel like he has the right demeanor, and he's obviously very smart about basketball. And so it's like the components are there, so can he put it together? But it's tough business, and at the end of the day, results matter, and so I'm rooting for him to put it together, but we'll see. Last question for you, Neil, is simply this. What are their options now? Like, obviously, that's a very large question to which you will write a lot of words about at the Hoop District, and we'll have you back on, and we'll talk about some of it. But just kind of top level, like, directionally speaking, what are the ways in which this team can be competitive in, let's say, the second round of the playoffs next year? Like, is there a path to constructing a roster that can do that, given their current cap constraints, given their potential cap space, trade option, whatever might be on the table through your eyes?
Yeah, so, I'll give my response, with the presumption that, Kyle Kuzma will be returning and re-signing. Got some quotes up on, Hoop District for people that can read through of his exit interview that he held a little bit earlier on Saturday. And essentially, that's going to be a domino effect. If he were to leave, and leave Washington holding the bag, that's a completely different story. But,
right.
My thought is that he will be back. He might, get wined and dined by other teams and have a good time with that free agency experience. But presuming that he's back, Washington might have to overpay a little bit to do so. But if he's back, Kristaps Porzingis most likely will be back. They're going to have a high draft pick. This is supposed to be a loaded draft class. Whether they can get lottery luck for the first time since 2013 in Otto Porter, that remains to be seen. That would be huge if they can get into the top four, because even if it's not Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson, there are a lot of high talent guys and really athletes, which this team really haven't had a ton of since, say, John Wall days, that can really, be the biggest, I think, change the radar and trajectory for this team. There is some elite talent in the draft, and that's going to be their number one option. But unfortunately, beyond that, they're going to be kind of hamstrung. More likely than not, they're going to have to pay the luxury tax, which Ted Leonsis has only done one time, in his full majority ownership of the team when Otto Porter got his, max deal. And so they will have, sure, maybe the taxpayers mid-level exception, but, they're going to somewhat be cutting corners, and free agency is not going to be a huge way for them to improve the outlook of this team because, again, once you're in the luxury tax and you're paying that much more than just somebody's contract, and, as anybody who's, been following the team, payroll and being a positively profitable business is, the utmost importance. So, unfortunately, besides the draft, I don't really see, a lot of avenues for improvement from, the core roster that they'll likely be bringing back. But, hey, you never know. There's always silly season and trades to be done, and, Tommy Sheppard is always on the phone trying to see what's best out there.
That is for sure, and I love your point about the fact that Ted actually wants this to be a profitable business because that has impacted a lot of decisions over the years, and we'll see how much it impacts it this offseason. Neil, great stuff, great work today. I was following your stuff all day long. Make sure everyone checks out what Neil's put up at the Hoop District, and we'll have you back soon as maybe some of the silly season gets underway.
Sounds good. Thanks, Craig.